Have you ever felt like the world silently collapsed and no one noticed? That something inside you shattered, not with a loud crack, but with a dull, soul-shattering crack, and yet everyone around you carried on as if nothing had happened? I have. War took my friends. It stole my sleep. It tore apart my family. But there's one thing it couldn't touch: my faith. And maybe that's why I'm here now, trying to find the words to describe what's been inside me since I returned. It's not easy to talk about invisible scars. They're the ones no one sees. But they burn when you least expect it. They're the memories that invade the silence. The smell of wet earth mixed with blood, the screams muffled by explosions, and the names we never forget. Soldiers, brothers, faces that time never erases. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. You might think returning from war is like coming home. But the truth is, often the body returns, and the soul gets lost somewhere on the battlefield. I know because it happened to me. People greeted me on the street, said welcome back, and smiled. But no one imagined what was going on behind that automatic smile. What do you do with the pain when there's nowhere left to store it? Have you ever been there? War has a cruel way of ripping away everything you love. One by one, the pieces of your life disappear. Dreams, plans, hugs, the peace of a simple family dinner. Everything turns to dust in your memory. And yet, amidst the destruction, something remained standing. Something that neither gunshots, nor death, nor despair could bring down. Faith. Yes, I clung to faith when I felt like I was losing ground. Not a blind faith, one of pre-made phrases or memorized speeches, but a faith built amidst chaos, amid tears and whispered prayers in lonely trenches. A faith that required no explanations, just presence. God didn't shout in my ear but made himself felt in the silence. And that, for me, was everything. If you've ever felt broken inside, if you've ever had to pull yourself together in the dark with no one around, maybe this story is for you. Because the pain a soldier carries in his baggage can't be seen in exams. It's in his eyes, in his way of speaking, in the silence between sentences. And even with all this, it's still possible to live again. Not in the same way, not with the same colors, but with a new meaning. Maybe you've never worn a uniform. Maybe your war was different, a mourning, a loss, a hidden trauma. But pain is pain. And faith is also for everyone. And that's why I want to tell you what happened when everything seemed lost. Because it was there, when there was no more hope, that something began to be reborn. That something began to be reborn. Not overnight, not with ready-made answers, but with small signs of life where before there was only darkness, an unexpected gesture, a good memory that escaped amidst the bad flashes, a subtle desire to get out of bed and try again. That's how I began to understand that faith, even wounded, still breathes. And when it breathes, it calls us back to life. And now, if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched you too. Maybe you carry a pain no one knows about. Maybe you've faced your own war. And if you haven't found words for it yet, this is a safe place to start. If this topic resonates with you, leave here in the comments what touched you most, or what this story reminded you of. I read each message with an open heart, because I know we are not alone in this. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. If you felt something real in this video, like it now. This simple gesture helps the algorithm show this content to those who also need to hear this message. And if you want to continue following stories like this, which speak of overcoming, faith, and real new beginnings, subscribe to the channel right now. You're part of this journey. And every new person who arrives here strengthens this network of support, listening, and empathy. Because the truth is, we all have invisible scars. And when we share them, something starts to heal. And that's exactly what I started to discover. Before the war, I was just a boy with simple dreams and a heart full of certainties. I didn't want much from life, just enough to be happy. I had an ordinary job, a modest home, and the sound of my mother's laughter echoing through the kitchen as she made coffee was all I needed to believe the world was a safe place. I was a son, a grandson, a neighbor. I played soccer on Sundays, making plans for the future like someone who had all the time in the world. There was no rush, no fear, no feeling that everything could fall apart from one day to the next. I clearly remember my graduation, the day I took my first photo in uniform just to impress my father, who was a veteran, and the way he looked at me with pride. I remember the first kiss I gave, the promises of love I wrote on a folded piece of paper, kept in my wallet as if it were a shield against pain. And it was real, you know? I believed. I believed that no matter how complicated the world was, my part was protected. I believed in the kindness of people, in justice, in the strength of friendship. I believed that nothing was more precious than being at home, with the ones you love, with a full belly and a peaceful heart. And perhaps that's precisely why the impact was so profound. When the war came, not just outside but within me, it was as if everything I was had been ripped away without warning. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow erosion, a loss every day, a piece less with each letter that didn't arrive, each friend who didn't return, each silence that echoed louder than any bomb. But before that, there was life. There was identity. And I need to tell this because many people believe soldiers are made of iron. But the hidden truth is that before we were soldiers, we were ordinary people, with fragilities, joys, and a heart that only wanted to beat in peace. My father taught me poise. My mother taught me compassion. But it was life that taught me that all of this can be tested in the blink of an eye. And yet, back then, I smiled easily. I had a silly habit of jotting down phrases in old notebooks, stray thoughts, dreams for the future, plans to start a business, maybe even get married and have children. I thought I had time for everything. I was one of those statistics who never think they'll end up in the middle of a battlefield with a gun in hand and a heart in pieces. And this makes me think of how many other people live like this today, rushing, making plans, waiting for the right time to live, unaware that sometimes that right time never arrives. The transformation that pain brings about comes without knocking, but when we look back and remember who we were, we can clearly see everything that was ripped away, and everything that, somehow, is still here. Because even after the loss, the brokenness, the inner turmoil, there's still a thread that connects the person we were to the person we can be again. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the truth is it wasn't just my body that emerged from the war. My mind returned in ruins. And that's when the quietest part of the battle began, the one no one sees, but which consumes me from within, day after day. Comment here. I'm on this journey too, if you feel that something in this story also speaks to yours. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it all started with a yes. A yes filled with pride, purpose, and a sincere desire to do the right thing. When I received the call, I remember the butterflies in my stomach mixed with a strange sense of honor. It was as if the boy who jotted down sentences in notebooks had been replaced by a man who needed to show the world, or maybe just himself, that he was strong, useful, and necessary. I didn't think twice. I donned the uniform as if wearing a symbol of courage. And perhaps that was the beginning of my transformation, but also the beginning of my downfall. Boarding was a scene that never left my mind. The muffled sound of boots on the ground of the military base. The eyes of mothers trying to hide their fear behind brave smiles and hugs that lasted longer than time allowed. There was a quick kiss, hurried promises whispered in my ear, and a folded letter that she placed in my hand with hidden tears. I held that letter like someone holding a piece of home. That was my starting point, and I swore there would be a point of return. But it wasn't quite like that. In the beginning, everything was driven by a mission-driven mentality. We believed we were there to protect, defend, make a difference. It's strange to say, but there was a kind of energy in the early days. Everything was new, and even fear felt like fuel. It was as if we were participating in something bigger than ourselves. The training, the strictness, the hierarchy, it all felt like part of a necessary process, a rite of passage. There was discipline, focus, goals, and deep down, a hope. Everything will be okay, I'll be back. But real war doesn't have a movie script. It doesn't have a heroic soundtrack or well-edited cuts. It has real gunshots, real bodies, blood that isn't a special effect, and worst of all, it has decisions no one should be forced to make. Decisions that stay with you long after the gunfire stops. Because the hidden truth, which almost no one talks about, is that the battlefield doesn't begin the moment you pick up a gun. It begins inside your mind, and once that's activated, it's nearly impossible to turn it off. The first confrontation was what shattered my illusions, that idealism of, we're here to save, evaporated like smoke in the face of the raw pain of seeing someone fallen with no chance of coming back. Death leaves a scent that lingers. The pain of others creates an impact that not even silence can hide. And what was once a mission became survival. What was once conviction became instinct. and the pride I felt began to merge with guilt, confusion, and an emptiness that could no longer be filled. He had a night I'll never forget. We were camping in silence after a long day, and one of the boys, the youngest of the group, started crying softly. He didn't say why. No one asked. We just let him cry as if it were normal, and maybe it was, because in that environment emotions were like stray bullets, inevitable, dangerous, silent. We learned to keep everything bottled up, not to show it, but the body stores it, the mind records it, the heart absorbs it, and sooner or later it explodes. At this point in my journey, I realized it wasn't just an external war. It was a battle of mind. It was as if I had to choose, every day, between turning to stone or remaining human, even if it hurt more. And there began one of the most painful behind-the-scenes experiences of any combatant, keeping humanity alive amidst dehumanization. This might sound strange to those who've never experienced something like this, but anyone who's had to endure more than they expected, anyone who's had to pretend they were okay just to stay standing, understands. They understand that there are times when pain has no name. It just exists, and it changes everything. The way you look, the way you listen, the way you breathe. It even changes the way you dream. And I, who once dreamed of returning as a hero, just wanted to survive without losing what little I still had left inside. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If any part of this story touched your heart in any way, now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there are things no one tells you about what happens after the shooting stops. The body does return, yes, but the soul often remains there, trapped in a place where time stands still, where sounds continue to echo, even in the most absolute silence. And it is at this point in the journey that a kind of pain arises that medicine cannot detect, that the eyes of others cannot see, but that consumes you day after day like a slow fire burning inside. I carried my companions in my arms. Literally, I saw eyes close right in front of me, and then I had to move on. That's what no one understands, the weight of surviving when so many others didn't come back. There's a guilt that settles in there, a voice that asks you night after night, why you? Why did you escape? Why did you get another chance and they didn't? And even as you try to be grateful for being alive, there's something inside you that almost feels like a traitor. It's as if life has left a debt, and then come the ghosts. Not the ones that scare you, but the ones that whisper, the sound of an explosion that never existed at that moment, but that your brain insists on reliving, the crack of a gate slamming that makes you jump, your hand trembling as you hold a cup of coffee, because something invisible inside you is still on alert. It's as if the battlefield has stuck to your skin, and no matter how many times you shower, change your clothes, and return to your routine, it's still there. These are the invisible scars, what the world doesn't see, and therefore easily judges, because people think that if you're back in one piece physically, then you're fine, but no one sees the late nights when sleep simply won't come, the conversations you avoid, the places you can't go anymore, the smiles you force, and the feeling of being present yet at the same time, completely distant. There was a time when I even avoided mirrors, not because I didn't like what I saw, but because what was in my eyes frightened me. It was as if that version of me had died back then, and what was left was just a survivor trying to look like an ordinary human being. People talked to me, hugged me, told me they were glad I was back, but I knew the me they wanted back no longer existed. It's hard to admit, but inside I was a wreck. He was smiling at the family dinner, but inside I was screaming. I sat at the table with friends, but I missed the one who could no longer sit next to me. And this pain, this absence, became an invisible weight that I carried with every step. It had no name, no form, but it weighed like concrete on my back. And that's where many people get lost. Because when you can no longer connect with the world, you start to doubt yourself. You start to think you're weak, ungrateful, broken. But the truth is, that's not weakness. It's trauma. And recognizing this was the first step in my transformation. Understanding that what I felt was legitimate. That it wasn't a whim, nor an exaggeration. It was the consequence of having experienced the unthinkable, of having seen too much, felt too much, lost too much. Little by little, I realized that what hurt me most wasn't the bombs. It was the silence that followed. The attempt to return to normalcy as if nothing had happened. The expectation of smiling, of working, of moving on, as if my heart hadn't been shattered. It was like playing a role I hadn't chosen, while inside I tried to piece together the pieces of who I once was. This part of the journey is confusing, because you want to feel again, but at the same time you're afraid of allowing yourself to live and lose again, afraid of creating bonds and reliving everything that was left hanging in the past. So you protect yourself, isolate yourself, keep quiet, and silence, over time, becomes a prison of memories, of unanswered questions, of unexpressed pain. But it was precisely in this dark place, at this point where I thought there was no way out, that something inside me began to pulse differently, still weak, still confused, but real. And that's what made me take the next step. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. If you've ever felt that, even in silence, your soul was also bleeding inside. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because surviving war is one thing, but returning home is quite another. We grow up believing that returning means the end of the pain, that the worst is over, that after the battle comes rest, embrace, and life resumed. But this is an idea that only makes sense to those who stayed. For those who returned, the feeling is of no longer belonging anywhere. I returned alive, yes, but inside, I felt dead. And perhaps that's the hardest thing to explain. The impact of being physically present in a world that seems to have moved on without you. The moment I stepped back onto the ground of my city was simultaneously a relief and a disorientation. Everything seemed the same, but nothing was the same. The streets were still there, the familiar faces, the smells I remembered, but there was a strangeness in the air, as if time had passed differently for me, as if my mental clock was stuck on a different frequency, a frequency where fear never sleeps, where tension is constant, where silence can be a sign of danger. I watched people walking hurriedly, fiddling with their phones, talking about trivial things, and I wondered, how do they do it? How is it possible to laugh so lightly when you know the world could fall apart at any moment? This was one of the biggest revelations for me. Civilian life, with all its normalcy, had become a strange territory. I was a visitor in a place I once called home. My friends were getting married, having kids, moving to another city, climbing the career ladder, and I was there trying to remember what it was like to talk without measuring every word, what it was like to look into someone's eyes without looking for signs of threat, what it was like to sleep without being ready to react to every sound. The connections that once felt natural now felt forced. I laughed without feeling. I responded without thinking. I was there, but I wasn't. There was one particular moment that struck me. An old friend invited me to a barbecue, saying it would be good to catch up, reminisce about old times. I went, trying to appear normal, but all it took was the pop of a champagne cork to make me freeze. The sound was sharp, sudden, and my body reacted before I could think. I cringed, my muscles locked, my mind was thrown back. The party continued. People laughed, but I knew something was off. And what hurt most was realizing that no one noticed. That's when loneliness truly sets in. Because it's not about being physically alone, but about feeling like no one understands what's going on inside you. And as much as people want to help, they often don't know how. Some distance themselves because they don't know how to cope. Others try to force a quick cure as if all it would take is a smile, thinking positively, or forgetting what happened. But when the pain is internal and ongoing, such advice rings hollow. It's like trying to cover a hole in your chest with duct tape. The hidden truth is that many of us return from war hoping to start over, but find a world where we no longer fit, and this creates a brutal dislocation. The routine that was once familiar now seems oppressive. Grocery shopping becomes a mission. Attending meetings becomes an exhausting effort. Even a simple good morning can feel rehearsed, artificial. You wonder if it's you who's changed, or if the world has become too small to contain everything you've experienced. And this doubt haunts you like a shadow. At this point, many decisions start to happen automatically. You avoid crowded places, you decline invitations, you distance yourself from those you love, not out of dislike, but out of protection. It's an unconscious attempt to avoid causing discomfort, to avoid being a burden, but by doing so you sink even deeper. Isolation becomes a habit, and when we get used to living with pain as our companion, we begin to believe there's no other way, that this is the new normal. But somewhere, even hidden, hope persists. A look, a memory, a childhood scent, a gesture of kindness. All of these have the power to create small cracks in the concrete that pain has built around us. And in these cracks, light enters. That's how I began to realize that perhaps there was still a path, a way to feel again, not the same way as before, but in a new way, a way that respected everything I'd experienced, without denying who I'd become. Comment here. That makes sense to me if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own life. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a point in your journey when everything inside you starts to crumble, but on the outside no one notices. And perhaps that's what hurts the most. Screaming for help in the silence while the world keeps spinning as if nothing were wrong. It's at this point that the pain stops being just pain and transforms into a kind of existential weariness, a weight that builds with every breath. You get up, walk, work, smile, but you feel yourself slowly disappearing, as if you're sinking on your feet. The nights became the cruelest scenario. When the world outside fell silent, everything inside me grew louder. My thoughts ran wild, unchecked, bringing back scenes, voices, faces. I tossed and turned in bed searching for a position that would silence them, but there was no position that brought peace. Sleep came in fragments. My heart raced for no reason. Sometimes I felt like I was falling from a high place, even lying down, and other times, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for dawn to feign normalcy once more. It was during those late nights that I realized how much the mind can become a prison. Anxiety was like an alarm that wouldn't turn off, a constant warning that something was about to go wrong, even when everything seemed calm. It was the fear of the unexpected, of loss, of failure, but most of all, the fear of myself, where these thoughts could lead me. I began to isolate myself more. I declined invitations, avoided talking too much. The smallest gesture, the smallest demand, seemed too much for me. Messages piled up on my phone. The missed calls became further proof that I was distancing myself from everything, including myself. And then came the darkest point, the one where you no longer feel anger, sadness, or fear, just emptiness, a void so deep it seems endless. I'd find myself looking in the mirror and no longer recognizing who was there. There was no longer any sparkle in my eyes, no purpose in my actions. It was as if I were living out of obligation. And the hidden truth is that at that point, everything starts to lose its meaning. Eating, showering, leaving the house. It all seems like too much effort for someone who just wanted a break from themselves. I remember exactly the day I sat on the bedroom floor, the light off, my head down, and thought, maybe no one will miss me if I stop. That phrase came as a whisper, but it chilled me to the bone, because it was at that moment that I realized how far I was on the edge. It wasn't drama. It wasn't exaggeration. It was the result of everything I had swallowed for so long, and it was there, at the bottom of the well, that my soul collapsed silently. No one saw, no one knew, but I completely fell apart. The cruelest part of all this is that on the outside I remained functional. I did my tasks. I answered the basics. Sometimes I even made jokes. And this confused people. You're fine, they'd say. You look strong. But the truth is, there are pains that specialize in hiding. And the more you learn to disguise them, the further away you become from help. The mind gets used to surviving on autopilot, and the soul, suffocated, learns to keep quiet. It was at this point in my journey that I realized one of the greatest revelations. No one notices when you're falling apart inside. Silent pain is lonely, and only those who have been there know how real it is. That's why, when someone tells me, it doesn't seem like you've been through that, I just smile. Because surviving with invisible scars requires a strength no one teaches, and it requires an internal silent decision to keep going, even without understanding why. This rock bottom didn't come with a warning sign. It built slowly, with layers of small withdrawals, giving up on talking, on asking for help, on trying. And before I knew it, I was no longer trying to live. I was just avoiding death. This is the kind of thing many people will silently relate to, because there are thousands who live like this, existing on emotional autopilot, unsure of how to escape. But even there, even on that cold bedroom floor, there was a spark that refused to go out. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and perhaps that's what true hope is made of. A breath, even in the midst of chaos, a memory, a song, a forgotten verse, an inner voice that says, "It's not over yet." That spark didn't save me immediately, but it kept me there, and sometimes that alone is a victory. Comment here. I'm on this journey too, if you understand what it's like to fall apart inside without anyone noticing. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was precisely on that cold ground, with my heart in ruins and my soul in silence, that something different happened. There was no light from heaven, no audible voice, no angel. There was only a barely perceptible whisper and an inexplicable presence. That early morning, while everything inside me screamed exhaustion, I could only say one sentence: God, if you're still there, find me. It wasn't a pretty prayer, nor a powerful one. It was more of a sigh than a plea. But in some way I can't describe, he heard. Faith didn't come like a bolt of lightning, like in the movies. It came like a breeze. And perhaps that's what surprised me so much. Because I expected a visible miracle, something that would change everything at once, but what came was something more intimate, a discreet warmth in the midst of emptiness, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that someone still saw me, even when I couldn't even see myself anymore. And in that moment, that was enough. Faith didn't bring all the answers, but it brought something I'd forgotten what hope felt like. Hope. I didn't become a different person the next day. I didn't suddenly become strong, but something inside me began to align, like pieces falling back into place after a long time away. I began to feel the urge to get up, the urge to see the sun rise, the urge to listen to old songs, the ones that spoke of starting over, the urge to open the window and let the air in, even if only for a few minutes. It was as if my soul was beginning to awaken from an emotional coma, and all of this because, almost invisibly, something deep inside had been touched. It wasn't easy to trust. Faith for me was a concept I'd always heard growing up, but I'd never felt it quite like this. I thought faith was for those who never doubted, but I learned that faith in truth is keeping going even when everything inside you wants to stop. It's reaching out in the dark, hoping someone will hold it. It's talking to God even without knowing if he'll answer. And it was in that space between silence and fear, between pain and relief, that faith began to build a shelter within me. One day, shortly after that silent collapse, a man stopped me on the street. I didn't even know him. He looked me in the eye and said, "You look tired, but you're not alone." He smiled, shook my hand, and walked away. I stood there, speechless. It was just a sentence, but it was then that I realized that God speaks in many ways, sometimes with a word, sometimes with a gesture, sometimes with an embracing silence. That moved me, not because it solved my life, but because it showed me that I was still seen. This faith, born at rock bottom, isn't the kind that demands perfection. It's broken, scarred, and yet alive. It's a faith made of doubts, but full of courage. It's a faith that looks at the scar and says, "It still hurts, but I carry on." And I do, because even on the days I thought I was alone, he was there, behind the scenes of the pain, in the space between tears, sustaining each silent step, not with promises of ease, but with presence. And do you know what struck me most about this part of the journey? It was realizing that God doesn't wait for us to be well before approaching us. He enters the mess. He sits on the floor beside us. He listens without interrupting. And when we no longer know what to say, he simply remains. And it is this permanence that heals, not all at once, but little by little, like someone holding a hand tightly until strength returns. Since that day, my life hasn't been a fairy tale. I still have difficult nights, I still have painful memories, but now I have an anchor, something inside me that holds me when everything seems to be shaking. And even if the world doesn't understand, even if I can't explain it, this faith sustains me, because it's not made of certainties, it's made of presence, and only those who have been alone know the value of that. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you too have ever been surprised by a silent presence that held you when you needed it most. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after faith is rekindled, even if only as a fragile flame, one of the most difficult parts of the journey begins, starting over. And starting over, for someone who came from the depths, isn't simple. It's not like turning the page of a book. It's more like picking up a torn, stained page and trying to write on it with hands that still tremble. But even though I was afraid, I decided to try. I decided to take one step at a time, even without knowing if my feet would hold. The first thing I faced was pride, because admitting I needed help was one of the biggest challenges of my life. The war taught me to endure in silence, to solve everything alone, to never show weakness. But the hidden truth is that there is great strength in those who allow themselves to be helped. It was a distant friend who told me, almost casually, "Man, there's a place nearby where you can talk to people who have been through similar things. No obligation, just listen." That kept nagging at me for days. And one day, Lacking the courage to tell anyone, I went. The place was simple. A few chairs in a circle, a table with lukewarm coffee, a mural with handwritten messages. I sat without looking at anyone. I listened more than I spoke. But in that environment, no one needed to prove anything. No one competed for the deepest pain. There, words had a different rhythm, and when I heard a man describe a nightmare that resembled my own, something inside me gave way. I saw myself in him, and I realized I wasn't an isolated case, a lost mistake, a soul without a place. I was just another human being trying to come back to life after the impact. After that, I agreed to start therapy. At first, I felt like it wouldn't work. I sat with my arms crossed, responding with, "I don't know, I don't care, I think so." But little by little, this stranger before me began asking questions no one had ever asked. And even without understanding, I began to answer. I began to access memories I'd buried deep within. And with each session, it was like a new brick being placed on the ground that I needed to rebuild under my feet. It wasn't magic. It was a process. It was coping. It was surrender. Returning to life didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually, in small moments. The first day I could sleep without panic. The day I managed to get on a bus without worrying something bad was going to happen. The day I accepted an invitation for coffee without making an excuse. Each of these moments was a kind of silent victory. And along with them, I began to realize that the world still held beauty, even for those who had already mentally said goodbye to it. I also started volunteering, not because I felt strong, but precisely because I still felt fragile. And there, by helping those who were also suffering, homeless people, young people in recovery, women at risk, I realized that pain can become a bridge, that our scars, when exposed truthfully, have the power to heal other wounds. I wasn't speaking as an expert, nor as a hero. I was speaking as someone who had been in the dark and returned with a flashlight in hand. One of the most memorable moments of this period was when a young man, after a conversation at one of these gatherings, said to me, "When you said that, I realized there's still a chance for me too." And that struck me in a way I can't even describe, because until then, I thought I was just trying to survive. But then I understood that my survival had an impact, that my reconstruction could inspire other reconstructions, and that became part of my purpose, to be a presence, to be a voice, to be a sign. Little by little, I rediscovered my own body. I started walking for pleasure again. I started cooking my own food. I listened to music without wanting to escape my memories. I accepted that my past exists, but that it doesn't have to dictate my future. I learned to recognize my triggers and respect my limits. I began to see therapy not as a patch, but as an expansion, as a safe place where I can continue to find myself. Today, I still bear scars. That hasn't changed, but they no longer define me. They are part of my journey, and each one tells a story of falling and starting over. And perhaps this is what many people need to hear, that it is possible to live with scars, that you don't have to wait until you're healed to start walking, because life doesn't wait, and the truth is no one emerges unscathed. But we can all learn to move forward with what's left and make something new out of it. Write it down. I'm on this journey too, if you are starting over, even if slowly, even if scared. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after you've been through everything, survived, rebuilt yourself and learned to walk with the scars, something unexpected happens. The realization that what nearly destroyed you may be exactly what guides you on your life's most important mission. When I understood this, it wasn't on a stage or in a glorious moment. It was in the silence of a conversation, in an exchanged look with someone who was in the same darkness I'd emerged from. It was there that everything made sense. The pain that once silenced me could now be used as a voice. It began without much pretension, an invitation to speak at a conversation among veterans. Nothing formal. A small group in a simple room, plastic chairs and suspicious looks. Everyone there carried something. They all knew what it was like to wake up sweating in the middle of the night, what it was like trying to explain to someone that, no, it's not just stress, what it was like to pretend everything was fine while the world inside crumbled. As I sat there, I felt the weight of stories yet untold, and when I began to speak, something happened. The hard faces softened, a respectful silence formed, not because of what I was saying, but because they understood, because it was real. That day I didn't offer ready-made answers or fancy speeches. I simply shared what I'd experienced, I spoke of fear, guilt, anguish, and faith. I spoke of slow transformation, of the falls along the way, of the strength we discover when all seems lost. And when I finished, one of the young men stood up and said, "You said what I've never been able to say." That echoed within me. It was confirmation that my pain wasn't useless, that everything that once nearly silenced me could now become a bridge for those who still couldn't cross their own abyss. After that, other invitations came: support groups, social projects, meetings with soldiers' families, listening circles. I started dedicating part of my time to this, not as an obligation, but as a response, because I know what it's like to be at the bottom and think no one will pull you up. And if today I can be that helping hand, then that's what I need to do. I realized that my story didn't need to be about the trauma itself, but about what I did with it, about how I chose to react. And that completely changed my mindset. With each new conversation, I realized that the impact goes far beyond the pain. There's a hidden strength in vulnerability. When you look someone in the eye and say, "I've been there too," a wall crumbles. And what remains is connection, authenticity, humanity. You stop being a lone survivor and become part of something bigger, a silent network of people who have decided not to let pain be the final chapter. It's a profound revelation that healing doesn't just happen when you get better, but also when you help others not give up. I began visiting military hospitals, talking to young people newly returned from missions, listening to parents who had lost children and no longer knew how to move forward. In these conversations, it wasn't about giving advice, it was about presence, about saying, "I'm here," with a firm gaze, even without promising solutions. And this presence often is what saves. Because when someone sees themselves reflected in you and realizes that there is life after chaos, something inside them ignites. And that's when true purpose is born. This mission didn't come with applause. It came with tears, with silence, with lingering hugs. It came with hard stories, with setbacks, with shy smiles after a long time. But with each encounter, I understood that I was no longer alone, that now, my every step had an impact, that the journey continued, no longer as a fight for survival, but as a meaningful journey. I've learned that pain doesn't need to be discarded for us to live well. It can be transformed, refined, redirected. It's like gold in the fire. Even if it comes from suffering, it can generate something precious. And the truth is, there are many soldiers out there, and not all of them wear uniforms. There are people fighting inside themselves every day, needing to hear that they're not alone. And if you carry a pain that has broken you, but also taught you, perhaps this is your next step, using what you've experienced to reach out, transforming your pain into a bridge. Because, in the end, it's not about forgetting what we've been through, but about deciding what we'll do with it now. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you also feel that the pain you experienced can be used to heal someone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after everything I've experienced, everything I've faced, and especially everything I've carried in silence for so long, there's one truth that has never changed, even when everything else seemed to have crumbled. This truth has accompanied me through the darkest days, the moments when my mind screamed and my body refused to rise. It was there when I lost friends, when I watched the world go up in smoke, when my very identity was swallowed by pain and fear. And even when I wanted to give up, it remained there, steadfast, silent, unwavering. The war took everything from me. It took the lightness from my steps. It took away the hugs I wanted to give but couldn't. It took away the sparkle in many eyes around me, and even the ability to dream for a time. It left me broken, confused, and directionless. It ripped me from my routine, my comfort, my innocence. It transformed me into a man who returned different from the one who left. And perhaps this is the hardest part to explain, the feeling of being alive, but of no longer being the same. The hidden truth is that war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It continues within us for days, years, sometimes a lifetime. But despite all this, there was something she couldn't touch, something that not even the heaviest silence could erase, something that endured even when everything inside me screamed that it was the end. My faith. And no, I'm not talking about that idealized faith full of certainties and ready-made answers. I'm talking about real faith, the faith that is built in the dark, the faith that doesn't need explanation but presence, the faith that, even cracked, still holds. It was this faith that sustained me when I no longer believed in myself, when I no longer saw any meaning, when the pain seemed greater than any escape. when the days dragged on and the nights were an internal battlefield. It was this faith that kept me going to support meetings, even though I didn't feel like it. It made me speak, even with a broken voice. It made me listen to other stories and see in them a reflection of my own. It was this faith that helped me understand that I was not alone, that there was a way back, that there was a chance, however small, of rebirth. And when I began to transform pain into a bridge, I realized that this faith could also be shared, that it wasn't just mine, that it could reach other lives, touch other wounds, rekindle other hopes, because faith, when it becomes a lived experience, spreads. And it was in this process of surrender, of listening, of presence, that I began to understand the true purpose behind my story. I didn't survive for nothing. None of it was in vain. Every tear held back, every silence swallowed, every internal struggle, all of this was raw material to build something greater than the pain, greater than the trauma, greater even than the war. Today I look back and recognize every part of the journey: the idealistic boy, the broken soldier, the silent man, the weary survivor, the present volunteer, and the human being who, though imperfect, chose not to give up, because at every stage, even if unknowingly, I was guided. And if there's one thing the war couldn't tear from me, it was precisely this: the certainty that there is meaning even in what seems meaningless. So, if you got this far and this story spoke to you in some way, comment below. Faith sustained me, because sometimes, all we need is to know that we are not alone on this journey. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story resonated deeply. And if at any point you felt you weren't alone, that your own pain was somehow understood, then it was worth sharing all of this with you. This space exists for that, for us to truly talk, with open hearts, without masks. If this message made sense to you, if it connected with something that lives inside you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." I read every word with care and respect, because it is these exchanges that keep this channel alive, and this mission too. Take advantage and leave a like on the video. It seems simple, but it makes a huge difference in helping this message reach more people who need to hear it. And if you want to continue walking with me through stories that touch, transform, and help us see new paths, subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss a thing and will remain part of this never-ending conversation. There's a video right here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and follow me there. I think you'll relate even more. See you there.